Hi, I'm Cindy Morales. Welcome to the Shout My Story podcast, where we share stories of women who choose life in difficult circumstances and the people who help them. I got to tell you, when we first started Shout My Story, we had some women approach us after our first stories came out to say, hey, my mom chose life for me, and I had that diagnosis that you were talking about in that other film. So we decided to start a subcategory of Shout My Story called Beyond the Diagnosis. And one of the people who approached us was our guest today, and her name is Madeline. Madeline was diagnosed with hydrocephaly when she was an infant, so she is living beyond the diagnosis. And we'll hear more about that momentarily. She also has a bachelor's degree in creative writing. She does freelance writing on the side, and she works at a community retirement center, which I'm interested in hearing more about because I was a nursing home administrator for about 10 years and worked in nursing homes for 20 years. So it's a topic I'm very interested in, which is a little off topic, but that's okay. She has a spunky canine named Maze, who she adores and posts regularly about on Facebook because I see those posts. So welcome to the show, Maddie.
I'm happy to be here.
So for those who don't know, tell me about your diagnosis. What is it? What are its symptoms?
So hydrocephalus is a neurological condition that involves excessive buildup of CSF fluid on the brain. And because the fluid cannot drain properly, the longer a person is stuck with this, there is more of a chance of permanent brain damage and death. Symptoms for babies include an enlarged head, excessive sleepiness, balance or coordination issues, vomiting, and poor appetite. Symptoms are a little bit different the older you are, but it is actually pretty common. 1 out of every 500 births end up with a hydrocephalus diagnosis.
How did you find out? How did your mom, obviously you were a baby, how did your mom find out that you had hydrocephalus?
So, we didn't find out until after I was born. What happened was my mom, I think it was kind of like a mother's intuition. I was just like overly sensitive to certain things. Like, I think my mom told me one time that I cried because the wind was too loud. Just not having an appetite, just being overly fussy. And then so she took me to the pediatrician. One of the head nurses was just kind of blowing it off, but my mom just had this feeling that something was wrong, and so she pushed and pushed, and it was a good thing because the test did show something, and I was sent pretty quickly to a neurosurgeon, and I think it was like that same day or the next day that I had my very first brain surgery.
So it wasn't obvious though when you were born. Like they
No.
didn't take one look at you and go, "Oh my word, you've got hydrocephalus." Okay.
No.
But
I
if you
was
hadn't been
5.5.
treated, your head would have gotten bigger and bigger.
Yeah, well, in some of my pictures, I do notice it, but you kind of have to look for it. Um, it was crazy because I've looked at those pictures like 1,000 times, and like maybe just a few years ago, I finally realized like, whoa, I am like a poster child for hydrocephalus as a baby. Like, this is crazy. But my case was not too severe, thankfully. But I have seen some very severe cases.
Can you give me an example of what a severe case would look like as opposed to yours?
So I can think of an example. So there in other countries, hydrocephalus is typically like fatal if it's not as developed like the US is. And there is this, I remember watching a YouTube video one time about this orphanage called the Govap Orphanage in Vietnam. And this, this lady was going into the sick ward, and there were these like young kids with ginormous heads. And, they didn't have any sort of treatment, but she was saying, it's too late for them because, they've gone years without any treatment. And so, they're just laying in bed. They can't do anything for themselves. And I know at the end of that video, they were like, yeah, there was a child in this video who did pass away. And this was like maybe over 10 years ago, and I wouldn't be surprised if every child in that room was deceased now.
Hmm. I don't know if I told you that my step grandfather had a sister who was born with hydrocephalus, and so she lived till 14. And they had a picture of my great grandmother. He was my only grandfather I knew. So even though he was my step grandfather, he was my grandfather. My great grandmother holding her like in 1914 or whatever, because, he was born in 1900 and I think she was born right around the same time, a year or two, either way. She died when she was 14 and she did have a really big head. And also, my grandfather said she couldn't really do anything. So without treatment, does it affect your cognitive ability?
Yes, it affects everything. I mean, even with treatment failure, all those things are impacted too.
So the reason I'm asking is because this is one of the conditions that if it's diagnosed before birth, a doctor might recommend abortion. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. And when when they're trying to, tell the expectant mom what to expect, I'm thinking the picture the picture that they paint is more like that picture, the orphanage picture or my grandfather's sister picture rather than your picture.
Yes.
Okay. So to be fair to the other side, what's more typical? If you're treated, do you look more like you?
You can. I mean, I have met individuals with hydrocephalus that are all over the spectrum in terms of disability. Like, I have friends that one of my friends actually is a few months older than me, and she just got engaged. She went to college and everything. I have another friend who had to relearn how to walk, but she just got a job working at a children's hospital for hydrocephalus research. But then there are others that I know where they are going to need a caregiver for the remainder of their life. But the personalities that they have, it's incredible. There's this one little boy. Well, he's not little anymore, but he's not verbal, but the amount of sass and personality that he has, just like typing on his iPad, like you can just see him just come out. And it's just, oh my gosh, I still laugh at something he said last month. And I was talking to his dad last night, and we were just both had a good chuckle at just like, wow, he's come a long way, but he's so stinking funny.
So, what would you say to those doctors that are like, yeah, let's abort this child because of this condition?
I would say that you can't put everyone with the same disability in the same box, because hydrocephalus is like a snowflake, because every snowflake is different, sometimes in the smallest ways, sometimes in the biggest ways. And you never know until you give that person a chance.
So let's talk about the treatments you had to have. You said you had your first brain surgery when you were what, a couple of weeks old, a couple
Five and
months
a
old,
half weeks. Uh huh.
5.5 weeks. Okay,
Yes.
and then if you, I'm sure your mom was probably really scared.
Yeah.
She
Very scared.
did she ever talk about that, like what it was like when you were an infant?
No, but I remember her telling me that shortly after my diagnosis, she did contact like some kind of support group that was on the other side of Texas, and the picture that the woman like painted her, it was like the children at the Govap orphanage. But I will say that my neurosurgeon put things into perspective for her and set things straight. Um, but back in the 90s when resources weren't as available, the story was very different.
So how many surgeries have you had to have over your lifetime?
10
And
so
10.
far.
And what do they do? What are they?
So the surgeries that I've had, well, the main treatment that they do right now is a shunt system, which is a surgical implant that the shunt is placed in the brain, and it basically drains the fluid into most typically the abdominal cavity. So it's like a lot of tubing going throughout your body, but it's saving your life. And um, at the start, it did have a pretty high failure rate, and it still kind of does, but it has definitely declined over the years. There is also an alternative treatment called the ETV, or the endoscopic third ventriculostomy, which involves an endoscope, and the neurosurgeon makes a hole in the third ventricle, and that allows the CSF to drain more naturally. But the thing about that is that you have to be a candidate for it, and you can only have it done when the ventricles are dilated, which means you would have to be in shunt malfunction and be sick.
Okay. So one of the reasons why I think doctors recommend abortion when there's a disability is, well, there's a couple reasons. One is that they think they're doing the families a favor because their assumption is that having a child with disability is extremely hard on the family, emotionally, financially, and so they think they're doing the family a favor by recommending termination. So I just want, and also then, and the other reason is because and this is what you'll hear from moms that decide to terminate, is that they don't want their child to suffer. So talk to me a little bit about your own life and how much suffering there is, and do you think it's worth it?
So, I will definitely say it's been a roller coaster ride. Um, in my early childhood, I was kind of figuring out, okay, what does this mean? What can I do? What can't I do? And that was definitely a very big struggle. And for a while, I kind of followed like my doctor's rules, like exactly because I thought my life kind of depended on it. But then eventually I learned that if you do things safely, you can go beyond that. Like I was able to start figure skating when I was 13, which is unheard of. And I did that for 6 years. I have had multiple surgeries throughout my childhood to maintain my stability. And I did have a very scary situation in college that involves me having to take a semester off just so I could fully recover. Um, but yeah, it is very scary because I mean, my treatment can literally fail tomorrow. But the current one I have is almost 12 and a half years old, which is the longest I've ever gone. And, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I have friends that have had, over 30 surgeries, and,
And what I
they're
mean,
not
in
even
those
20
surgeries,
yet.
do they involve like putting in another shunt or what is it?
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes, there's other things, other complications like a shunt infection, which is very serious. That can involve like more time in the hospital, at least two surgeries, lots of IV fluids, things like that. Um, and I know one thing that's happened to me is that some of the tubing that drains into the abdomen, it came out of where it's supposed to be in the abdominal cavity. And so all of that fluid was draining in my head and my abdomen simultaneously, and it wasn't being like absorbed at all. And so I was like walking around with all of that, and it was just awful. Um, but I would say it has been worth it because I proved that woman wrong that, when she told my mom that I was going to be a vegetable my entire life. And so I made this joke to my dad that the day I graduated college was the day that pigs flew, or at least started flying, because the thought of graduating college was insane. I mean, even in high school, the thought of me going away to college was crazy.
Were you afraid like you'd have a medical emergency or something or just
Yes. Yes.
Mhm. And you did,
I did.
but you got through it.
But I did. And I thankfully, I mean, my college was like 3.5 hours away from my home. But I mean, Texas is a very big state.
Yes, yes.
So, um, and because my school was kind of out in the country, I kind of had to go to a bigger city if I needed, to make sure that I wasn't in shunt malfunction. But if I had an actual problem, I had to come back home.
What made you decide to major in creative writing in college?
Because it was something that I've loved since at least fourth grade, and I knew that if there was a period of time that I wouldn't be able to be physical, um, I can do that from bed. And it's working out. And I love doing it on the side, and it's just I can take it anywhere. Um, you know, just jot something down in the middle of something and then go to something else.
What are some of the things that you've written? I'm interested to hear.
So, I have a poetry thesis, and I do have this like one chapter that's all like medical poetry about my journey and everything. I've done some fiction and nonfiction. Um, I wrote a piece for a missionary, and it's supposed to come out in their book a little later this year. And I am also helping an individual from my dad's church write a book as well.
Okay, so is there any way now that your disability is affecting your life?
Um, yeah, I mean, making sure that I have, you know, because it takes me a little longer to learn things. So, at my job, when I first started, it was asking for more training. And, now that my boss knows that, like, if I'm going to be trained in another area, it needs to be spaced out so I can get used to where I'm working currently before I start a new area. And another thing is probably making sure that my schedule, like work wise, um, works with my appointments that I have during the week.
Do
Um,
you still have a lot of medical appointments you have to keep?
I do.
So you've in this is those are the things that are a little different than other people. Like I don't have to go to the doctor every week, but ways would you say your life is typical?
I mean, I come home to my dog, uh, walk her in the morning. She greets me at home when I get there from work, and
I
I
forget. Is
still
it a lab?
got. Yeah, she's a lab mix.
Yeah.
Yes. I've got a best friend. Um, I still go grocery shopping. Still got bills. Just like those everyday little things. Some of them I may have to do a little differently, or I, may need my parents' assistance. Um, but yeah, for the most part, it's pretty much the same.
What about your job? What exactly do you do at the retirement center?
So, I work in the dietary department of an upscale senior living facility, and so I'm kind of like the middle person between like the kitchen and the residents. So, like, if the residents have a specific diet, or like a special meal that they're requesting for that meal, I make sure that it gets into the right person, making sure there's enough food for everyone, that kind of thing. But I'm also, in between meals, I'm on the unit preparing for the next meal. So I get to know all my residents. And the cool thing is that I'm on the memory unit, and I've got issues with my memory. And so, like, it allows me to, you know, relate to them in that way.
Would you say that in general, now this part of this just has to do with temperament, but some of it has to do with like dealing with adversity. Would you say that in general you feel like a joyful person? You're a joyful person?
I mean, I like to think so. I try to find like joy and humor in the little things. And, because of what I've been through, celebrating those little things is something that I always strive to do. Like, when I make another year surgery free, I do something. I mean, this past year, I took the day off work. Um, and I also try to spread that to my residents as well. Like, I have this sweet little lady who, she doesn't like know my name, but she knows my face, and she'll always come and visit my workspace and just like, ask me for a cookie or something. And like there was one day that I introduced her to chocolate pudding, and the smile on her face, I will never forget it. And, it was really cool to be able to like tell her sons that, yeah, she really likes chocolate pudding. So you can add that to her list. And just like being like that source of joy is really cool.
What the part of the reason I'm wondering is because it seems to me, this is my hypothesis, if you have a joyful heart, regardless of your circumstance, you're going to deal with the circumstance a lot better than if you were kind of grumpy or the glass is always half full. Because especially if you're dealing with a disability and you have to go to the doctor a lot and you might have to have surgery. At any moment, you may end up in the hospital, right? So if you're looking at the glass half empty, you're probably not going to deal with that adversity as well. I'm wondering. I'm
Yeah.
thinking.
I mean, it's on the money. I mean, actually, one of the things that I've been doing lately is I've been getting some like really funny, like chronically ill shirts. I'm actually wearing one right now, and it
What did?
says, let me guess, my
Labs came
labs
back
are
normal.
normal. And, when I've worn it before, people just got a kick out of it. And I'm just like, you know what? This is my mood today. I'm going to wear it today. And last week I met with my neurosurgeon, and I had on a shirt that said Shunt happens. And I was like, you see this? And he was like, yeah, I like that. And so it's just, those little things that I can do for myself where, yeah, it doesn't make everything better, but it makes the moment better.
What about faith? Is faith a part of your life?
Um, I'm in like the middle of like a period of like self-discovery. So I'm like still trying to figure out like what that means for me personally. But I know at the moment it basically just means, doing the right thing, being a good person, and, helping others.
This is kind of a scary question. Is your life expectancy considered to be less because of your disability?
No.
So you could live a normal lifespan with hydrocephalus.
Yes, I mean, when the treatment was like before treatment was even available, the life expectancy was not very good. And even when it was first available, I mean, yeah, it increased a little bit, but the issues happened so frequently that it was just kind of hard to come back from. But I will say that the treatment has improved a lot, even though um, there needs to be a lot more done. Um, but it has improved drastically since I was first diagnosed.
So, what would you tell moms if they receive this diagnosis in their pregnancy to encourage them to choose life?
I would say it can be scary, but don't do it alone. I mean, I've learned that it takes a village to support someone with hydrocephalus, but it's really rewarding in and of itself. And I've also learned to lean on people, especially like my neurosurgeons, the one that diagnosed me. I still talk to him, and I'll reach out to him if I have a question. Um, and he's never afraid to, be blunt with me. And it's always nice to just run something by him. But like knowing that I have that, it's such a relief. But also, now with technology and everything, resources are just a click away. And you can find that village. Doesn't You don't have to be in person, it can be over the internet or whatever.
I mean,
um
I know that in the trisomy community, there's like Facebook groups,
oh yeah.
support groups, there's
Yeah.
organizations. Is there a support organization for hydrocephalus?
Oh, there are several.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
there are resources you can use to choose
Yes.
life. I wonder if they get those resources when they get the diagnosis.
I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if they did. But I don't
I
know.
would, because usually they're usually my experience with most doctors is they're very interested in kind of pushing abortion as a solution, quote unquote, to any kind of problem, which they see disability as being a problem. They see disability as being a problem for the family, for resources, for emotional, draining you emotionally, for the child, him or herself, that they would suffer, and no one wants their child to suffer. Of course, that would mean you don't have children because everyone suffers. But they really, I think it'd be great if they put those out. I personally don't know of any, so it'd be like really good if geneticists and OBGYNs had that resources like at their fingertips. Like I say, here's the diagnosis and here's where you can go for help.
Definitely.
I think, is there anything you want to say to people that I didn't cover that you think is important for us to know as a person who has hydrocephalus?
Not that I can think of.
Okay, I wanted to make sure. All right, so you're wearing a whole lot of wristbands. Can you tell me what they mean?
Yeah, so I've got some of these have been given to me by like people that I'm close to. This one's for hydrocephalus, this one's for mental health, this one's for pediatric cancer, this one is for brain cancer. Like I make them, and like at places like this it's just kind of fun. And I know at one of the events I went to, like we exchanged them, and it's a lot of fun. It's kind of like how like some of the Taylor Swift fans, what they do at like concerts and stuff, except it's like medical, but it's fun.
Okay, great. I have one I can send you one of ours. It says, "Shout my
Okay.
story, choose love, choose life."
Okay.
I can do that. Okay, so thanks so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it, and so nice to meet you in person because, as I said at the beginning, you shared your story a few years ago, and you can read it on our website, www.shoutmystory.org. So if you have a story to share, please contact me at info@shoutmystory.org. And meanwhile, choose love, choose life.